Welcome back to The Good Pod Guide with me, journalist Lauren Windle. On today's podcast, I'm joined by the one, the only, Felix from the Good Pod Guide team. Sit back and relax while we help you find your next great listen. So today we are pulling back the curtain a bit on the Good Pod Guide and giving everyone a taste of the cogs behind the shiny exterior, I think. You may have heard me talking, if you've listened to several other episodes, about Felix. Felix is a member of the Good Pod Guide team, but I would say, maybe semi-humbly, that like the two of us are basically the Good Pod Guide, right? I mean, there are other people around. We take their advice, you know, we check in with the people, but like effectively this is Lauren and Felix versus the podcast.
We are basically just boots on the ground doing this all, more or less. Absolutely.
So it's so exciting to have Felix here, particularly as every podcast that I've reviewed, that I've listened to, that I've spoken to you guys about, Felix has listened to as well. We have shared our thoughts on it and kind of gone forwards. So to have him here is kind of like getting the dream team on air together, you know? So guys, this is Felix. Felix, tell us a little bit about you.
Hi guys. So yeah, Felix here. Well, before my life was just podcasts, I used to study at Falmouth University. I've got a background in sort of wildlife, marine photography. Since then, I do a lot of music, commercial stuff. And
Felix's photography is excellent, guys. And if you want to check it out, he is on Shot by FJB on Instagram, all one word, all lowercase. And you can see some of his work. But today we are going to talk about podcasts. And today is a great day for me because it's kind of like there's been a school project where you've been teamed up with someone else and you've just let someone else do all the work. Because I am so under-researched on this podcast, I think because I was like, Felix has totally got this. So what are we talking about today, Felix?
So today we've got the Joe Rogan Experience. Definitely one of my favorites. When I used to work cafe jobs, I used to actually sit in the back doing KP, listening to this podcast. It's an interesting one. It's fun. It's long. Gets you through the day.
So long. Now, tell me, what's the point of it? What's it about?
Well, the point is just to listen in on a conversation between, you know, some pretty interesting people. I mean, Joe Rogan has got some really weird people on this show. And I think it just to literally listen to this sort of conversation unfold. And yeah, it's as stripped back as a podcast can be.
Okay.
That's basically how I can describe it.
So we've already like discussed our thoughts on it. And I guess before I did any research for this, before I heard how much you liked it, I just thought Joe Rogan was this like guy who recorded so many long podcasts that it's almost like exhausting.
Yeah.
So who is Joe? What is this Joe guy about?
So he's actually an American stand-up comedian, UFC commentator. So he's obviously all known bigger in the States, you know, the big booming voice that will be at most spectator events. And he's sort of used this sort of access to all these celebrities to make this podcast. And truth be told, it's not as boomy and shouty as you might think.
I think I also had the impression it was really shouty because the image for the podcast is so like aggressive. It's like a guy yelling at you. I've got a question that's maybe a bit controversial. Is he that funny? Because I did listen to some of it. For a comedian, he doesn't seem to like make many jokes. I didn't laugh.
Yeah. No, I think this isn't. I think you shouldn't go into this looking at it as a comedy podcast. It is purely more a conversation podcast. I don't think he really. Sometimes some humor may drip in, but it is purely just a conversation.
Do you know what? I think if I had gone into it thinking like this is interesting conversation, this isn't comedy, I probably would have taken to it more because I felt a bit disappointed.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Okay, so that makes sense. I mean, I listened to the Elon Musk thing. Which was quite recent. I mean, am I right in thinking he does one a day?
I think so. He's got over like 1,500 episodes now. I mean, he just blitz it. Always got someone in. Always in that weird sort of alien-like bunker. He's always got someone in there doing something. I mean, seems to make sense.
What do you think our listeners should start with? If they've literally, like me, have never heard of Joe Rogan and never thought of diving in, almost because of the sheer volume of material, like where's the best place to start? What are your faves?
I think Well, if it was up to the listener, try and find someone you are interested in, because there's going to be no point in jumping in on someone you're not a fan of. And I think with this podcast, you've got to find a guest that actually you're interested in listening about. This is a 3-hour podcast. There's no point in listening to, I think he interviewed, what was his name? He interviewed Bernie Sanders. There's no point going into an interview with Bernie Sanders if you don't like Bernie.
Yeah, fair enough. Okay. I think that I'm a bit offended by the audacity of a 3-hour podcast. Like, you've got to think you're so interesting to create that much content and think that people do want to engage with it. I guess it's because of that, and not just the length of each one, but the number that are there, that I really feel completely not sold. So I was almost a bit surprised when you said how much you'd actually listen to it, because in my head, this is just like an absolute hard no. But that's why it's great that there's more than one of us doing this, because what I think isn't necessarily what you think, what our listeners will think. So if I gave you like one shot to convince me that this is worth just one 3-hour episode, like, sell it to me. Tell me why this is my new favorite.
I mean, the one episode that really drew me in was Elon Musk. I know you've listened to some of that. I'm quite sciencey, and I think, we hear all this stuff in the news about Elon. He's an odd guy, and this podcast, this conversation, just really shows how weird he is. Like, from aliens to talking about building this highway underneath LA to SpaceX. I mean, it's got everything. I mean, even in his early one, that one scene of him just smoking a joint, making Tesla shares drop. I mean, that's more than enough. It's outrageous sometimes. It's just got some outrageous moments. I think,
was this a section you highlighted to me when he was discussing about Mars and creating a civilization on Mars? And like, one thing I hadn't thought of, because I don't think about creating a civilization on Mars. That's why I haven't thought of it. Is the idea that it would only work if it could stand completely independent from Earth. If there were no spaceships coming from Earth, could it work? And I was like, this is madness.
Yeah.
Like, and he was saying how even just one small thing that is vital to human life, if it's not there, like vitamin C was his example, then that whole civilization wouldn't work. And I was like, this is interesting to think about, but also it's like fucking crazy.
Absolutely. I mean, it's so out there, and I think he's such an abstract guy anyway. It's you don't want to think too much about it, because then it just starts getting scary, and he's pretty confident we're going to be there in the next 10 years or so. In our lifetime, we may be on Mars, and it's just so weird. Like, it's just so weird. That's all it is. It's weird. It drew me in, and it's just such an interesting thought to think about. That's why I've been drawn in so much.
Well, there you have it, guys. If you've got a spare 3 hours times 1,500.
A long drive, perhaps.
This is long drive material. Then check it out. You probably already have, to be honest, because it's a massive podcast. Let us know what you think. In the next episode, I'm joined by my mate, Nat Barker, and I spill the beans on his secret Twitter account before we review podcast Invisibilia. We've put all you need to know about the show on our website, www.goodpodguide.com, so check that out. You can also follow us at Good Pod Guide on Instagram and Twitter.